Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Men's Development Network's MDN at 25 series of conversations with colleagues, friends, and allies in relation to addressing the issues of health and well-being, gender equality, and ending gender-based violence. These series of conversations we hope to have over the year with the various different members of our organisations, with, as I say, with friends and colleagues and allies to discuss these particular issues. Okay, so today we have with us two very fine gentlemen, I may add, in John Doyle, who's from the Men's Development Network itself, and he's our client support director of services, our client support manager, and also Owen O'Neill, who is the CEO of MOVE, which is Moving Men Overcoming Violent Emotions, who are both involved and work with domestic violence intervention programs with both our organisations across the country, and have been working together collaboratively for many, many years in the rollout of the national domestic violence intervention programme here in Ireland. So they're important. I think they're important people in terms of the work that we talk about. And so I'm going to first to kind of go to John, to go to John or to Owen first, and really to talk about like his own background first off. So welcome, John, and our own, and like in terms of your own background, I know not to kind of put a downer on this, we know that you're retiring soon, and that's a very, very good thing, and you'll get a chance to get some muscle memory back in your legs in terms of your cycling adventures. But I suppose, like, you know, in light of the fact that you are retiring, that means that you have an enormous wealth of experience and knowledge around your own profession and your work, and I'd just love to get a sense of where, in terms of coming into this work, where you came from yourself, and how that was.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity, Seán. I suppose my main background is working in the public sector, actually, up in Northern Ireland, and that was mainly around drug and alcohol work. So first as a social worker and then as a coordinator in terms of drug and alcohol work, very similar to the drugs task forces, which people would be familiar with down here. So yeah, look, not domestic violence related at all, but really in terms of the client profile, you know, there are similarities in that a lot of the clients that I would have worked with in the North, there would have been domestic violence issues in there. And even prior to working within the drug and alcohol field, I was a family and childcare social worker. So obviously domestic violence was there as well. But I would have to say that it really wasn't given the attention and the priorities. And that's going way back, I suppose, 20, 30 years ago. But personally as well, I think I always was interested in gender equality. I was involved in a men's group back in my 20s, actually, which was a very, very positive experience for me. So I always had an interest, I suppose, in the lives of men and the challenges which men and indeed women face growing up, but particularly men because of my own gender. So yeah, so I suppose the opportunity to work in the field was very fortunate for me. Myself and my wife had planned to move to the West, really, and I seen the job advertised, and I thought, yes, look, this is an area of work which really interests me and excites me, and lucky enough, Move Ireland took me on, and I'm very grateful for that. So certainly coming to the end now, I've practically done 6 years with the organisation, and it's been a great experience.
Okay, and tell me, Owen, like when you chose to study social work, like what was, to say, like, what was the kind of the motivation behind that? What was your experience within your, like to say, your own home? Why would that even be on your radar? It's kind of an interesting area to move to.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, look, I suppose I was always very conscious of my own working class background. So I suppose I was always conscious of class, conscious of inequality. My parents, I suppose weren't necessarily that political. They weren't activists. My dad was a builder. Mother would have done various jobs, trained as a nurse. So I suppose there was a social awareness, and maybe in the north, because of the political situation, you certainly are more aware of inequality, and so social work seemed to be, for whatever reason, it seemed I did sociology and psychology as a degree, so I was always moving towards whether it was working in social policy or social work. So yeah, look, I always had that on my radar.
Yeah, yeah. And John, would you be similar in terms of where you came into this work from, and how you found yourself there?
Well, similar in one very practical sense, that it was linked to a move, a geographical move of location. So similar to Owen, I had been working as a psychotherapist for 10 years in West Wicklow, and we decided to move for various reasons, and to relocate in a coastal location, living by the sea. So that was part of the focus. And then I suppose when I arrived in Waterford, and even before that, I had been working, as I say, for 10 years, working from home as a psychotherapist, and I kind of had a feeling I would like to work maybe in a small organization, working with people rather than kind of in that, which can be a bit isolating, just working from home with seeing people on a day-by-day basis. So that was the plan. It wasn't greater than that, but it was this sense of maybe it'd be nice to work within a small organization. And then the job was offered within the Men's Development Network. And actually, the job I went for, I didn't get. And I knew very quickly I didn't get it, because the CEO at the time, Owen O'Neill, came running down the stairs and said, "John, did you see that other job that was advertised? Did you go for that as well?" And I said, "No, I never even saw it." So he said, "Well, there's another job, so try for that." So I tried for that, and it was this job called the coordinator of the Southeast Domestic Violence Intervention Program, which was a mouthful. And I knew absolutely nothing about domestic violence at that stage. And so there was, and again, but it was a bit, but also a bit like Owen, what would have been similar was I had been in men's groups for many years, and I did have that sense of wanting to work with men. So the opportunity with the Men's Development Network was part of that small organization working with men. Now, certainly, I wouldn't have, in my wildest dreams, thought about domestic violence, really. It wouldn't have been on my radar at all, really. I knew about it, obviously, but not going into that work. So it was a big transition, a big change.
I see from both of you, like the fact that you had the men's group experience, which is really interesting, and I do recall myself, like maybe we're of an age, all of us are of an age where in our 20s, the experimentation was around going to men's groups as opposed to going off and doing other things. I don't know, but I suppose the interesting thing about that is that my experience at men's groups, and I'm sure it's been similar to yourselves, was very much around offering men an opportunity to be their best selves, or as what we say, their most authentic selves. But also it created a space where we tried to, it was kind of coming at men from a strengths-based approach. And my sense is that this is critical within the work that you do with perpetrators, that there's an aspect of where you have to kind of be coming at it with men to say, we need to look at your, the positive strengths that you have and focus on that. Does any of you want to maybe comment on that or debunk that even? That'd be.
Yeah, like I think you have to see men as part of the solution in all of this. That to not work with them is really losing a key opportunity, really. Like there's a serious amount of bad press out there in terms of men. And yes, you can't argue with a lot of it, but like each gender has its challenges in terms of growing up, and I'm not going to sit here and say that men's experience of growing up is worse than women's experiences, but they're very different and they shape us as men. And that shows itself in how men behave towards women. And we have to address that. It's our responsibility to engage with men on those issues and see the strengths, because if you don't see the strengths, well, you've nothing to work towards.
Would you find that kind of sense of optimism is a critical necessity as well, John, in terms of working with men?
Yeah, I think for sure. I don't know what I'd say optimism, but I think that seeing beyond the behavior. I mean, you have to deal with the behavior, call it out, but nonetheless, in the man, see the potential that's there. And as Owen is saying, you do have to face up to the challenges that the men were set in their early childhood experience and see how it's shaped them. So I think there is this balance of a strengths-based approach, but while not condoning the behavior, because I think if you don't have a strengths-based approach, you probably won't build a relationship that would be a support and a foundation for change. I think you've got to, and you can only build a relationship if you see some strengths and some value in the person. So no, I do think it is critical.
And I suppose one of the things that I would think that in terms of engaging with men, in some ways it is about working collaboratively with them, in terms, and I know both our organizations really value the collaborative approach to the work. And I wouldn't mind just maybe Owen, if you like in terms of the importance that you found it, and let's be specific here, even in terms of the relationship between Move and the Men's Development Network over the past 6 years, in terms of that collaborative approach and how important it is for the development of services like this. Do you want to give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, look, there's a couple of things I probably want to say to that. Is that in my previous work, working for the equivalent of drug task forces up in the north, was all about partnership working. And really that, like I'd been doing that work for probably 15 years. So all of my day job was about getting people around the table to work together. So I suppose coming to working in a voluntary organization was a very different experience, but I still always believe that you should work with other organizations. So I always had that really in the back of my head. And then selfishly, I came into an organization where I knew very little about domestic violence. And John was there, like really, John was a great support for me personally, in terms of he was the person that I could go to talk through the complex issues around working with these men. So, selfishly, that was a really, really important support for me. So I suppose those two things, and then, it makes sense to work together. I think the fact that the Department of Justice, and for credit to them, commissioning the development of a national program facilitated that as well, because it's easier to work together if you're all delivering the same package. It meant that it made sense to train together, to discuss all the issues, all the details around the programs, the material, all of that. So yeah, look, it's been probably one of the most positive things about my experience has been the partnership work, particularly with John. And, and the wider organisation. It's been a great experience.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to add anything to that, John, or in terms of your own thoughts?
Well, no, I'd echo similarly for me. Owen has been a great support, and he came in to move, as he's just saying there, at a time when we were moving to the national programme, and it would have been very difficult had we not had that good quality of co-op partnership, because we were endeavouring to to roll out a national programme, which, and we talked about this among ourselves, we didn't necessarily have a kind of a blueprint for how it was going to roll out. So in a positive way, maybe it was left to the organizations to take initiative around that and leadership.
Yeah.
But we couldn't have really done that, or at least would have been very awkward without that partnership together. And certainly, that was a big change in the amount of communication and talking through things. And then what I liked very much was, I think there was a complementary element to the way we worked, because I might come up with an idea and think, well, should we do this? And I might initiate something and move on, and then Owen would come in and support that, and vice versa. He'd have an idea that maybe we should be doing this around this policy. What do you think about that? So it was that nice kind of complementary nature, that we possibly have different strengths and different focuses, but we were sharing those. So we both gained from, I think, each other's experience, rather than we're somehow in competition or, trying to not share what we knew. So there was a great openness around sharing what we knew, putting it out there, getting feedback. And then you get a stronger program, because you're getting people coming with different perspectives, and the organizations are different, and there's maybe different focuses in certain areas, but there's a complementary thing there that I think worked really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I suppose, like we've talked about, our kind of non-adversarial approach that we would have with an MDN around all the other aspects of our work as well. But I suppose that's a critical thing, is to be able to kind of have that parity of esteem between the organizations, so that, and that I would say, from my experience, that type of work, that type of development of that parity of esteem and that sense of equality and collegiate environment with each other takes a lot of time for that to work, and also takes a lot of confidence in each other to work. It doesn't happen automatically. Would that be your thinking on it as well, in terms of, like, if you've been working in partnership with like the local drugs task force, to get people into rooms, they agree and they understand the notions of partnership, but it takes a long time.
It does. It really does. Getting organizations to work together is difficult, but really that was what my work was about. So I totally believe in it. I think there's too many silos, there's too many organizations working in isolation, competing with one another. It's not a good way to be. We're much stronger working together, sharing ideas, as John was talking about. It's a much better environment.
Yeah, I think it would be probably useful. I know, because people might be listening in today, and they may not know what the DVIP program is, the Domestic Violence Intervention Program. So maybe one of you want to give a quick introduction to the national program, because I think if people understand what we've been talking about up to now, but they're probably thinking, God, what's the program? So does somebody want to give maybe a quick tutorial on it?
Do you want to take that one, John? You're more concise than me,
Yeah. Well, yeah. So basically, it's a national program working with men who have been violent or abusive within their intimate partner relationships, and with an integrated partner support or partner contact service, so that the partners of the men on the program get support, or the ex-partners, while the men are in the program. I think we're in about 19 locations between the two organizations, or something around that, in the country. And basically it's a program where the men are referred through self-referral, probation, TUSLA, HSE to the programs. They're met for assessment to see, that's mainly around suitability and around risk assessment. And following that, if they're suitable, they then go into some pre-group one-to-ones, which depends a bit on the number of those. And then they go into the Choices group program, which is 6 modules. And that is over a period of maybe 23 to 26 weeks, depending on a bit. There's a bit of flexibility around that. So that's the program, and they're looking at the modules are various topics like respect, support and trust, gender, parenting, emotional intimacy, and there's one I've forgotten there, but they're the topics covered. And the program is co-facilitated usually by a male and female co-facilitators, and with regular risk management, clinical supervision, practice supervision.
Yeah, I think that gives would you be happy with that?
Just the partner support, I suppose, aspect.
Yes.
You know, that the partners of the men are offered support in their own right, and that is delivered separately. And across the country, it's delivered by some women's services. It's also delivered by private counsellors, and we employ our own partner support worker in the Dublin area, so it's a bit of a mixture, but that's an essential part of the Choices program as well.
And let's talk about, I wouldn't mind talking about that particular part, because I think it's interesting the development of the program in terms of working with men who have been abusive within their intimate partner relationships. That the whole idea in a sense is first off is to work with them, but it is very much around the protection of women and children, or partners and children, in the event of these type of things happening. And I suppose it's about, I'm interested to talk about first off the thought processes, because I know when the program started, the partner support wasn't always there, so it came on board. Okay, it came in through the practice. Okay, and so I wouldn't mind having a sense around what were what were the discussions around that at the time, and how you might even bring this together, because we know and that it's a vital part of the program now, and locally in each of the organisations, each of the areas where programs work, there's really, really strong relationships and partnerships have been developed to ensure that the partner support program is in place, and that the critical area of risk management is managed through it as well. But I wouldn't mind talking a bit about kind of how the reach out happened to the sector. Would be interested to get a sense around that, and what are challenges to that, and if they still exist even, and wherever it may be. So
I can start with that, Seán, just because I go back a bit further than known in that history, because I think, yeah, you're right. There was some work being done with men, and it was kind of voluntary work initially around the issue. But then I think what happened critically was, first of all, you had the task force report on violence against women in '97, and then that was followed by the setting up of the regional planning committees. And on the agenda was work with perpetrators. So, and I think at the early stages there was the focus on the work with the men, but then quite quickly, and we did, I have to say, rely to some extent on the experience in the UK through Respect, the organisation overseeing best practice there. So it did emerge that the best practice was to have support for the partners and ex-partners. However, at that time, back maybe in 2003 or 4, perpetrator programs were not viewed with a lot of enthusiasm, generally speaking, and I think women's services were a bit uncertain or cautious about getting engaged with the program. So there was a period when we were setting up the partner support elements where there was a lot of engagement and communication with services about you know, some services might support the work, but they wouldn't necessarily come on board with providing partner support. Other people, you know, other services did come on board fully and provided partner support. And other organs weren't really that interested in the programs as such. So there was a variety of responses, and we just took people where they were at, what they felt, and we went with that, their level of engagement. But I think quite quickly there was a sense that, and even though there are challenges to it, there was a sense that it was better to be part of the process than not to be part of it, and then they could inform it and feed into it and give feedback around that. So, you know, I think I mean, there still are challenges in that work, as Owen knows, but I think it's a bit more established now for sure, that element, and how and the buy-in and the engagement from partner contact services are, you know.
Yeah, and to say, stepping into it, I suppose, Owen, from your own experience in terms of that, those building those relationships or managing those relationships with partner support organizations. So having stepped into it and it was in place, like, you know, what were the kind of the things you felt needed to kind of to either grow or develop as you stepped into the role with Move?
Yeah, look, it has been a difficult area. There's no doubt about it. And funding is an issue around it. There's no doubt about it, and it's probably something. Looking back over my 6 years, it's probably an area that I probably should have done more work in terms of reaching out to women's services, because we do, I suppose, across the 10 areas, we only have 3 women's services providing the partner support. And that is disappointing, you know. And look, there's various reasons for that, and John has alluded to them. But ideally, that's who should be delivering the service. So we have had to come up with alternative providers. So yeah, look, I think we still have a long way to go in that. I think some services are still very ambivalent about working with men. I suppose they see they really do see the hard end. They see the women coming in and going back to these men and coming back to refuges again, and no change happening. So that, you know, it's understandable that they're very skeptical of the potential for change. So yeah, look, I still think we have a long way to go, you know, within that area. But it's so important to have the woman's voice in the program. We really do need to support her, because I think if we're working with just the man in isolation, we have a very limited sense around, you know, around what change is actually taking place within the home.
Yeah, I think that must be the critical thing for me, listening to our coordinators, and the whole issue around managing risk is a critical area around this, and of course, if you don't have the route to get feedback in terms of what's happening from the woman you're nowhere really at the end of the day. Yeah. So clearly that there are some issues in relation to, from a practical point of view, for women's organizations or for refugees, seeing the recidivism of it continuously coming back and forth, that there'd be a certain amount of skepticism in relation to the program. But would there be other ideological kind of aspects of it as well that would be kind of preventative, or kind of creating the mind, is kind of saying a challenge to them engaging in, for more services to be engaged in the program?
I don't know, Seán. Like, there may be a view out there that what we provide is a support group, you know.
Sorry, as what?
You know, that what we offer is a support group, you know, for men, and that we're not holding, you know, men to account. There there's also a view out there that if you are working with the man and the partner is still in a relationship, that the risk is actually heightened.
Okay.
That is a view out there as well. And, you know, that's something which we are incredibly aware of. You know, we monitor risk, you know, on an ongoing basis. We meet regularly with the partner support staff. We share information. You know, so that, you know, that's what we do. We work with risk. But you know, I think those are maybe just some of the misconceptions, you know, that are around there. You know, and it takes time to, you know, break down those barriers. You know, dispel those myths.
Yeah.
I don't know, John, if you feel there's other issues that get in the way.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think there's another issue that's just comes to my mind in terms of, in the one hand, because of risk concerns and the idea that the man is responsible for the abusive behavior, there's a tendency, and that we're working with the men, there's a tendency where the partner support work is really just seen as a kind of an addendum to the main work, and it is a bit marginalized, and that puts us in a bit of a bind, because there's, in one sense, you're providing more of a full service to the men, if you know what I mean. And the women are there really just, they're being contacted, they're being supported around safety plans. But now, and I know you've been looking at programs for women, but I think there's a feeling that it's something that is, I won't say that the women are being used just as a way of getting feedback, but there is a sense that maybe some more fuller program should be provided to those partners. And then that does bring up an interesting question as to, well, what would that program be about? And that's something else. But I do think there's that sense that really they're only you know, as I say, an addendum to the main program.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point, that, because I suppose when I've certainly come across the notion that there's an element of duplication in the program, you know, or like if there are women's services providing support to women, why is it necessary for partner support to be in place, wherever it may be? And that does, so what you've raised with me now is that notion around that, another collaborative approach with the sector, with the women's organization, around developing a more embedded kind of partner support program, you know, into their existing services, because I think it seems like that like if they see it separately, then it's viewed separately, as you say. But and I think one of the things that we've realized as well, that there are people who I think we have to debunk the notion that this is a duplication of support, because a lot of the times that women who are involved in air services would not necessarily be involved in the refuge in the first place, you know. So there's those kind of things that are there that we need to be raising, or kind of challenging the orthodoxy in terms of the thinking on it. And I think a way to do it is to do it in that collaborative approach. And it's the women saying, listen, can we develop a program here which is integrated and supportive of individuals on the partner support program, and you can integrate it into your existing support work that you do as an organization. And that then may, I suppose the resistance to become involved in the program then is not just seen around supporting men, but it really is around supporting the women and children there. So yeah, that's a really interesting kind of point, and around that work. And I suppose I'd like to maybe come back into a kind of a broader sense from yourselves around, to say, the causes of domestic violence. Okay, and I think there are many out there, and there are many stuff around it. But one of, I suppose, really what I'd like to highlight, I suppose, is that there is what I would say there's an intersectionality around the causes of domestic violence. There's lots of different things that impact that come into the scenario. None of it, I may add, is condones the activity or the behaviour. But I think it's interesting to kind of look at some of the causes, and maybe would you like to maybe start with that, Owen or John, whoever would like to jump into that in terms of the causes from your perspective?
I just jump in because, Seán, there's always a problem even when you mention the word cause. And I'm inclined to talk about factors that influence or create an environment where that, because I think it's very hard, because the thing that you will name as a cause, somebody else will say, well, that's present in somebody else's life, but they're not domestically abusive. So we try to think in terms of that there is choice there, but there are factors mitigating against the full capacity of a person, man or woman, maybe, to follow through on a choice they might make. And this is my own reflection over the time, and I think Owen and I share this to a certain extent around some of the factors, and Owen has said about this gender inequality. So, like, we do live in a culture where there is that significant still, even though changes have happened, there still is gender inequality, and significantly women have less power still in society than men do have, and you can look at so many statistics still around that. But the other factor then, and I think you talked about this, and it's very much part of our own work around male gender socialization. So how do we still tend to bring up boys, and it still can be around being competitive, being resilient, being, what's that word, stoic, and, big boys don't cry. Still, some of those things which we think are gone are still there. So I think we socialize boys to be afraid of vulnerability, or to not look for support, or to be embarrassed around difficulties, and then that can lead to a build-up of whatever anger, resentment, isolation that doesn't help in intimate relationships. And then the third piece that I think is important, and it's the piece that is a bit more controversial, which is around early childhood experience and issues around attachment, around trauma, because they have a significant impact on how people can regulate their emotions and their responses, their impulsivity within intimate partner relationships. So if you put those three together, it's a powerful mix, inequality, gender social and female gender socialization isn't necessarily better, but it's different, and early childhood experience. And certainly every time, when I was doing the work, and again, I've talked to Owen about this, when we look back through our case files, I don't know but I would put the percentage up as very high, that maybe 80% of the men have been either victims of early childhood sexual or domestic violence, or witnesses of it, or part of a home where that was going on. And we do know that has a significant impact on how people will manage their later intimate partner relationships. So for me, there's those three things that are critical. And as I say, maybe not around causes, but there's certainly strong factors that will influence behavior in the negative by and large.
Yeah, and your thoughts on that, Owen?
Yeah, look, John, you've summarized it very like that. You've summarized it very succinctly. It is those three areas, and like it does show itself in the men that come to our door. There's mental health problems, there's drug and alcohol problems, there's literacy issues. They're complex lives. Domestic violence is one of the issues. A lot of them have other problems as well, and part of our role is to signpost these men, onwards to other services, or actually ask them to take a step back and deal with other issues before they come to us. So yeah, look, people just don't one day become an abuser, of their partner. There's a long history there.
Yeah, and I think that whole, and I suppose the multi-factor approach is really important, because And I think if you try and look at stuff in isolation, I think maybe if you went back maybe 25 years, you'd be talking about dealing with the gender power relationship. You know, that was the primary kind of thought process around kind of engaging men around this thing. That and as I say, you look at the power wheel. That's the main. And maybe somebody would they like to explain that power wheel? You know, so.
Yeah, it's the power, the Duluth, I think, power and control wheel you're referring to, Seán, there, and that looks again at the various manifestations of power and control within a relationship. So whether it's financial, psychological, sexual, economic, so it's looking at how this impacts on a woman in this case. You know, and it is, and again, it's not that we're throwing that particular baby out with the bathwater around that issue of power and control. However, that isn't just linked. It is linked to the inequality, but that also links to issues around, you know, male gender socialization and early childhood experience, the need to control itself. Why is that there? Like, why do I need to control somebody outside me? And usually there's some internal fear that if I don't control them, then I'll be pushed back on my own internal vulnerabilities. So, but I think you're right. Come back to your earlier point. It was kind of almost an educational model in the sense that we were, you know, trying to, you know, nearly convince men that this was the root of their behavior linked to these power dynamics. And it could be done in a very didactical way in a schoolroom setting, you know, and we even talked about the phrase domestic violence as learned behavior. And so you can unlearn it, but that does put it right within, and actually that's in the Istanbul Convention about perpetrator programs teaching men. And I think the difficulty there is when we talk about learning in early childhood and we kind of project a cognitive thing back onto that children learn as the same way they learn, you know, 1 and 1 is 2, that they learn about intimate partner relationships, but it's not the same. It's not a cognitive learning. It's an embodied learning that is even you know, unconscious. So they're not learning it consciously in the schoolroom. They're learning it unconsciously in the relationships with those around them. So you can't unlearn that in the same way as somebody says, you know, no, 1 and 1 isn't 3. Let's go through it again. 1 and 1 is 2. You can't learn about emotional regulation in that didactic way. And I think that's when people talk about learned behavior, they make a bit of a mistake there about what we really mean. How is it learned in early childhood? So yeah, we've had to move away from that pure, and not that it was ever pure. I think there was, again, in the Duluth model, it was very good, you know, because when you get men in a room with good facilitators, regardless of the structure, good work can be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from, I suppose your thoughts on that, because I think it's interesting to think about, even when we talk about the perpetrators, like the spectrum of development has been quite substantial in terms of its involvement, you know. So, and I think that's really an interesting and a very powerful exploration to happen. You know, that you'd start at one point, and now this is where we are now. And I think that's really quite kind of I suppose excited by that the learning is happening, that we allow ourselves to be as open as we can to kind of learn new ways in which to deal with this, new ways in which to look at it, new theories of approach. These things are vital. And in some ways they come hand in hand with that collaborative partnership approaches, that openness to kind of learn from each other, you know, which is brought it from wherever it was 25 years ago to where we are now. You know, I think there is a very different feel about the program and what's actually happening with it. And I think from my sense around it, and I want you to kind of contradict me if I'm wrong, but my sense around the program, that it is very much around the opportunity to reflect for people to reflect on their behaviors in an environment that is non-judgmental. You know, that it's about saying, you know, we do call out the behavior. You're here because you've accepted that your behavior is inappropriate and that it causes harm.
Yeah.
And that you need to reflect on that, but to reflect on it in a way that nobody's saying you're a bad boy or you know, that you're reflecting on it in a way in which you think, what are your own causes for why you do this, or what are the factors that have influenced you around it, and then to give you the tools to seek support or look for resources to support yourself, or it may be, or then to take the simple steps, the action to try and counteract the behavior. So I think don't know if you've anything to say about that, Owen or John. You know?
Yeah, well, I suppose as you were talking there, Seán, and look, it's maybe a bit of a side issue, but I think we do talk about the program when really we should be talking about a service that has elements depending on the needs of the man and indeed his partner.
Yeah.
Like really is, look, you know, everybody gets the same program. And I think we have to be smarter and we have to have the resources that we can provide, you know, meet the needs of our clients in a much, much better way. And that can be group, it could be individual work, it could also be couple work if it's safe to do so. There's also the issue of the children. Where are the children? You know, what sort of supports do they need? And I think that's where I think the next real conversation needs to be. And look, that conversation should be about with women's services as well.
Sure.
You know, because there are various, like, men, not all men are the same. Some men have very, very complex histories, and they probably need more than the 23-week program. There may be some men that may not need the 23-week program as well. You know, so that's where I think that, you know, the next sort of development needs to be. It's around a service as opposed to the choices program.
Yeah. Oh no, I really like that approach, and I suppose what I'm thinking as well, within within the service, I suppose, is there a need as well to be able to acknowledge as well that there are certain men who do not and will not ever want to change. That's the other thing. Okay, that, you know, and whatever reasons that they are out there, I think we have an idea about what are those reasons, you know, and that they're very comfortable in their lot. They think that this is their view of women in the first place. This is where they should be. This is all. So I think there needs to be acknowledgement of that. And I think in also even acknowledging that, and sometimes we don't, I think we don't acknowledge it often enough. And this is what causes maybe the women's services to be probably slower to embrace, because in some ways we don't acknowledge that there are those that are out there that will never change.
Yeah.
That be a fair assessment, do you think, as well?
Yeah, and look, I think that is, you know, the men who were with us and just ticking the boxes, you know, that is a challenge, and we have to be smarter and call that out, and be very attuned to that, because there are men in the program, and that's why they're there, just to tick the boxes. We've got to be very sure that isn't happening, because if that is happening, then our credibility really, we lose the credibility, and it feeds all of the myths, the misunderstanding around what our programs are about.
Yeah. Would you have the similar thoughts with that, John?
Yeah, it's difficult, and it's a kind of a practice issue, because also we have had situations where, you know, men are turning up, maybe not much change, and as Owen is saying, they're just ticking the box. And then in communication with the partner support workers, there's a feeling that, look, the partner would still prefer he was in the program and she knows where he is on Tuesday evening or something. And then we're thinking, well, that's fine, but for us, is that putting the credibility of the program under question? And again, it shows a bit the stresses and the challenges around, you know, all the things you've got to weigh up when making a decision. And this is one of the things which we have, and I think again, I've noted this with Owen and certainly among our local coordinators, that I think the complexity of the cases has increased over the years. And there's a feeling that you're having to spend quite a bit of time in case management, not just risk management, which is one thing, but almost case management, just managing men who are quite complex through the process with other things going on and other agencies involved. So I think there is that challenge of how, again, you respond to the men who are not engaging, but maybe safety has been increased outside of that room by just holding the man. And then you're right, Seán, there are men who I think, and possibly these are the really hard cases, the men who are the kind of what is presented, I think, as the domestic violence man who is very controlling, you know, who is very functional in the world, who is the pillar of society, but his partner has no power in the relationship. And those men tend to go under the radar very easily if they are, you know, well known and well respected out in the community, and if nothing will happen to bring to surface. Whereas we're getting, again, we tend to get men who are already known to services before the issue of domestic violence comes up. That's a secondary thing. They're there because of criminality, addiction, mental health issues, and then on top of that, here's domestic violence. Yeah. Whereas some of those men, I think, for whatever's going on, they may be functioning at a higher level in terms of day-by-day functioning, and they don't come. And they may be resources to avoid coming to the notice of services. So I think it's absolutely true that you know, that is very difficult, and those women may end up, you know, ending up well, they could end up as a fatality, or certainly going to the refuges and not be suitable to engage with us because those men are not acknowledging any issue necessarily.
Yeah, like at least I would say at least a third of our referrals don't make it past assessment. Probably even higher, and that's due to them themselves dropping out, or just they're just not suitable. When they go,
I think it'd be useful for the audience to hear that when we talk about somebody not being suitable, what do we mean by that? You know, what is meant by yeah.
Well, they're there because the social worker has told them to turn up at a meeting, and it's very obvious, you know, after an hour that they don't want to be there, that they don't see themselves as having a problem, that it's denial, minimization, all the usual, you know. So they're really the classic reasons, you know, and just people are just not able to commit. You know, they need to sort out mental health issues or addiction issues first. So, you know, there's a whole range of reasons, but it would certainly be probably 30 or 40%. You know, we have a fairly strict, you know, criteria in terms of entry onto the program.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the question is, what happens to those men? That's we're left with that, you know, those vulnerable partners and those men who maybe are not being engaged with at all. It's another challenge, you know.
It is.
Yeah, it is a significant challenge, and I suppose speaking of challenges, we're coming up to the last 5 minutes, folks. If you thought that didn't go quickly, that I suppose in terms of the steps, you know, the next steps for the National Domestic Violence Intervention Program or series, or what did you call it again? Owen?
Service.
Yeah. Then you know, like, what do you think are the key things you'd like to see happen for the service, you know, into the future? You know, what would you feel would be the most progressive thing that could happen? And
have we only got 5 minutes?
Well, I'm looking for you to bullet point it all.
Look, I just think a proper service, you know, the staffing model, and me and John have had much conversations about the staffing model. Like, most of our facilitators are on no fixed hours contracts. You know, we can't give them enough work to guarantee them a certain amount of hours. So if we had full-time staff and we were delivering a range of interventions, more, you know, individual work, group work, and couple work, you know, it would be a much stronger service. We could tailor the service to the needs of the clients, and we would be able to offer proper careers in the sector. And like our, you know that, like, we now have an accredited program through Carlo IT. So, you know, it's a recognized qualification. That's a good thing in terms of, you know, that development. But, you know, fundamentally, and like NGOs always talk about, it's, you know, resources, but to do this properly, it does need significant investments. We do need to hold on to staff. Like, staff turnover is considerable. It's considerable in both organisations, and that, you know, that is a worry. And that just boils down to the fact that we're not able to offer proper careers in this, you know, in this field. And look, I could go on and on, and John, like, you know, I'm sure there's other areas as well, but for me, they would be some of the key issues that really do need to be tackled.
John, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that is it on the two sides, the side of the workers and creating and establishing a recognized career path and a particular almost profession in terms of this work, so that we can hold on to and build, because what's happening is, if we have too much of a turnover, we're not building that, you know, corporate, hey, that we're not, whatever, corporate wisdom or whatever, or, you know, organizational wisdom that we have to draw on. So I think the service, the structure of the service certainly needs to be looked at. And then again, echoing what you're saying, Owen, the providing a comprehensive service that isn't a one size fits all, that recognizes that there are differences in the men who come to the services and the partners or ex-partners. The needs are, I mean, there are some maybe general needs and there's general work that could be done, but there are very specific issues that need to be addressed for people coming to the program, and we need to have the flexibility to respond to that in terms of how we're structured. And I think that, and then really kind of nailing down, if we see those three elements that we talked about earlier as being significant factors in domestic violence: inequality, gender, conditioning, early childhood trauma, we need to be able to isolate what's really going on in this particular family, and then what is the next step to resolve that, what's needed, rather than just, you know, putting everything at it as if everybody was the same and they get the full program. As Owen is saying, we have certainly had men. We've had men at both ends of the spectrum. We certainly have had men coming in where even the facilitators and the partner support workers felt, look, they need couples work, really. They need to, there's a bit maybe around communication going awry, and it's not this full-blown, you know, extreme end of domestic violence. Now, we do have the extreme end where you wouldn't be thinking of couples work, you'd be thinking about really safety and all of that. But we have to be able to respond to that those two spectrums, or be able to work our signpost, but not just signpost on vaguely to some other. It needs to be contained. So you're working on this issue, and if you signpost, is it within the context of this issue of domestic violence, and it comes back to us, then, you know, really more integrated service for these families and for these individuals.
Yeah, I think I'd like to nearly end it on that kind of note, because I think it's a positive note, really, in terms of where and where the service may go. That I suppose, first off, that there's a knowledge there that we need to look at it potentially a bit differently, and in light of the fact that we have a review and the new national strategy, it's probably it's a good time to be having these kind of conversations. So listen, on behalf of the MDN, I just want to say thank you both again for coming along today, and that I'm wishing you all the best, Owen, in your retirement, and I hope it goes well for you, and I'm sure it will. I know you have things planned for yourself, wherever it may be. So the best of luck with that. And again, thank you for your participation, and also thank you for your ongoing kind of support and collaboration and partnership and with ourselves. I've really enjoyed working with you over the past couple of years in my time and in MDN. So all the best and go well, as Lorcan would say. And to you again, John, thank you as well. And to anyone else watching there today, if you need to seek further information in relation to the programme, you can contact Move at moveireland.ie, I think, and then there's also men'snetwork.ie to get more information in relation to the programme, or if you wish to signpost and refer somebody on to any of the programmes, you can do so through that programme or through the websites, wherever it may be. So on that note, thank you all, and we'll see you again. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Seán.
So.